welcome. And my name is Liz Baxter. I'm the CEO here at North Sound ACH. And just thank you all so much for joining us for the continuation of our monthly sessions around advancing a just and inclusive culture. And today we are focused on racial justice and culture as resistance and community care. And I am going to play somewhat of a light MC role. So I'm going to do some of the housekeeping pieces to get us started. And we always begin with our land acknowledgement statement, which I will read here. We begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. And we'll put in the chat as well a link to a website where you can learn more about the land where you currently are inhabiting, and whether you want to look up where you are today, where you went to school, like anything you can just put in, a zip code. You can scroll through a map and just see kind of the breadth and depth and scope of the indigenous land that we are inhabiting. Glad to see that you all are putting your names and information in the chat box. We're going to use the chat box throughout the day. And if you can have your cameras on, that's great. I know that, between internet and a variety of other things, sometimes we have to flip them off and flip them back on. But just appreciate you being here. The meeting is being recorded. And so, we just want to have that so that we can share this back out with folks who might not be able to make it today. We've got a great team that put this together. Marco Morales on our team has really done kind of the yeoman's work of pulling this great panel. And I am going to share with you here kind of what our hope is for what we're doing today, what brings us together into this space. And so Xenia, I'm going to be turning it to Xenia Junkier on our team to just try and remind us of how these things are all connected, the learning series, and then we'll move forward. So Xenia, I'm going to turn it to you.
Great. Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Xenia Junkier, she and her pronouns, and the Population Health Director here at North Sound ACH. Super excited for the session today. So our monthly network learning sessions are open to all through the theme of advancing a just and inclusive culture. And cohorts are one strategy of the network. And so we leverage these network sessions to build capacity, share out really powerful local, regional, and national bodies of work. And then we uplift existing initiatives and programs, practices, ideas, models, analyses for us to consider in the future. And we really hope that these spaces also are an opportunity to build relationships with individuals who have opted into being part of a cohort at whatever level and at whatever cohort you've chosen to opt into, and for folks who are joining us solely for the network sessions. We know that relationships are an incredibly important part of how we ensure a just and inclusive culture. And that this is really also a space for folks who are maybe new to the cohort work, who want to learn a little bit more. We leverage shared beliefs in our work. Folks that have, I think everyone probably has seen these shared beliefs at least once, hopefully. If you have questions about them, you can definitely email us. But these are the shared beliefs that we move through the network and the cohort work with. And then we always want to make sure that everything that we're doing is grounding in our equity and tribal and indigenous sovereignty and learning work. So we ensure that across all of the network sessions, as well as across all cohorts, we are really grounding in practices that are rooted in targeted universalism and othering and belonging. I'm going to turn it back to you, Liz.
Thanks, Xenia. So next up is going to be Marco. And Marco, I'm going to probably have you introduce yourself, but Marco's a member of our team and has taken on pulling this amazing panel together. So Marco, I'm going to switch to you.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, thanks so much for for the opportunity to do this today. And thank you to our guest and panelists for agreeing to be part of this conversation. if we're able to highlight on my screen, I'm sure I'm probably highlighted, but if we're also able to, is Ramona, Michael, and Enrique all highlighted now? Just wanted to make sure that we're able to also see them. So I think I see Ramona. So yeah, I kind of wanted to start with the framing of the conversation to really provide really provide context and set the table in terms of what we're trying to do today with this panel discussion. And really invite Enrique, Ramona, and Michael, who I will allow themselves to introduce themselves here shortly. The opportunity to really engage in an authentic conversation, right? I think often in these spaces, whether it be in any spaces of institutions where historically Indigenous peoples or people of color have not had equal sitting at the table, we always come as guests and never as, and not really as people that get to sit at the table. So I wanna provide the opportunity for all of you to, to feel comfortable, to share an authentic experience, to be yourselves, right? I put myself out there in saying that, like, I got your back, I want this to be an authentic conversation and to be able to really share with all of us your experience and our experience in a way that's authentic and brings, to light, the way that we can, we often experience injustice, but also the way we create justice in our own ways. Right. And so I just kind of wanted to, say that and lay that statement to provide you all the opportunity to just be able to teach us today. Right. I think this is the main point of this. So I guess my first thing is to give Michael Tooncap the opportunity to please introduce yourself and share a little bit by yourself. And then we'll go on to our next panelist.
Happy day, everybody. Na anhu miget Tuncap, la hensi David Guma Tata Tuncap, Guinean familia and Tobe, Tata Niguat Guahan. My name is Michael Tuncap, and I'm from the village of Anigua on the island of Guam, and I reside here on the ancestral land of the Puyallup. And I've worked in education and nonprofit and prison abolition since 1998. And I've known Marco for about, I think, 9 years now from the Student of Color Conference. And it's an honor to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
Michael. Enrique.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Marco, for the invitation on such an important and new topic. It's just an honor to be here. It's just a beautiful day to be here with everyone. Let's see. I've known Marco for about 10 plus years, Marco. We've been doing some good work in the community, Aztec dancing, and just giving back with youth conferences and so on. And it's an honor to be here with Michael and Ramona. I've been involved in the community by being a school board director for the Cedar Valley School Districts, a commissioner for Housing Authority of Skagit County, and board member of Latino Civic Alliance, and just involved, right, for various reasons that we're going to be talking about today. So with that, it's an honor to be here.
Ramona, please.
Yo senchim aniavu, inepo Ramona Vagdran teak, in mala into Consuela Castro Beltran teak, Bempo, California. May you all be blessed. Good morning. My name is Ramona Vagdran. My family is Yaqui descent, originally from northern Mexico on my mother's side, Anglo-European descent, originally from Ireland on my father's side. I was raised just with my mom, so that's really my cultural standpoint, but I was also taught to acknowledge all of my ancestors. And with that, I want to acknowledge the original people of the land upon which I'm standing right now, the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Apache, as well as many other Indigenous peoples who have called this place their home. I'm here in Denver, Colorado. I am an associate professor in the Graduate School of Social Work here at University of Denver. And my work has focused on historical trauma and healing in Indigenous and Indigenous Latinx communities, with a focus really on the role of storytelling and narrative in healing from the impacts of historical, intergenerational, and environmental trauma. It's such an honor to be with you all today. Good to see familiar faces. Hi, compadre Enrique, it's good to see you. And I think your count is a little bit off. We've all known each other for almost 15 years. Isn't that wild? I know, but we start to lose track after time. But I also go way back with this community with, our efforts in danza in the Northwest and, all of the things that come along with cultural preservation and resistance together. So beautiful to share this space with you in addition today. And nice to meet you, compadre Michael. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all three. So, I really appreciate your introductions. I wanted to kind of begin the conversation to, and I'll start with you, Ramona, Dr. Beltran, to talking about what is the role of culture and resistance. If you can share a little bit about your thoughts on that.
It's such a good question. And I really love the way you framed this meeting today. So I was thinking about how I could best bring the work that I've done. And I think the best thing I can do is speak from my heart and speak from my experience. So because that always informs, who we are and what we do. Culture is really everything, right? It's who we are. It's our, the stories that teach us how to live in right relationship with ourselves, with each other, with the planet, and all of the things that are included in that story, right? So our morals and ethics, our understanding of the cosmos, our understanding of how we know and how we are. So culture, to me, in all of the research we've done, is really central to healing, to resistance. And I think of healing as a form of resistance because the colonial project is such that we shouldn't be here, right? So if we're here and we are healing and not only surviving, but thriving, well, amazing, such a demonstration of resistance, right? And it doesn't always have to be in that fight, that stance, or we're in the ring with the colonizer. We can actually step out of that and determine what healing is from our perspective, and not in relationship to colonial hetero white supremacy. This is important to me because as a mixed race indigenous Chicana, I grew up losing my family members to chronic preventable diseases over and over and over again. Why? Because of poverty, because of lack of access to education, to healthy foods, to information about health and healthy foods, to coping skills that were used to deal with the constant barrage of traumatic assaults related to racism and colonization. So when I went to get my master's in social work, I focused on advanced clinical practice. And what I realized was that all these evidence-based practices, and now it's been some time, so there's been a shift in the culture of evidence-based knowledge. But at the time, the idea around evidence-based practices was really, okay, we have these practices that have been shown to be effective, maybe not so much with specific cultural, racial, ethnic, and cultural communities. So what we're going to do now is do some addition and inclusion of cultural material, cultural values, maybe some food. Some of my friends call it the food, fabric, and festival approach to, cultural competency. What I noticed was that didn't actually speak at all to our needs. It didn't actually speak to healing. It was just adding maybe some translation. Maybe it was adding the idea that you bring food to a community gathering or to your practice, and that wasn't helping. And so what became clear to me as I was doing that study, and I was participating in health research was that I wanted to pursue developing and evaluating practices that centered culture, that all of the things that we do in relation to how we address health and health impacts were really emanating from that center. And so I see that as this way to speak directly to our communities in language that they understand and is not imposing of colonial heteropatriarchal approaches to health and well-being, but is actually emanating from us, right? Because we can't create culture-centered practices without our community members. We have to be centering them in the process of developing and designing. So what I've seen as we begin to like use our own language to really describe what our experience has been, and then to take charge of how we want to respond to that experience, it's really been transformative. And I'll share with you later, if there's time, how I've seen that transformation through our research. But I wanted to start with that. Really, culture is everything. Our practices should emanate from our culture. We should be centering our communities that are most impacted. And we have to think about our healing as a form of resistance. So I'll stop there and pass it along. Thank you.
I love what you said, Doctora Beltran. It's just growing up, in our neighborhoods, you get the messages that your cultura is not important, that you have to assimilate in order to be accepted and to be to thrive, and for the longest time, I believed that growing up, but then something clicked, it's like, no, like why am I looking at my parents like I'm embarrassed of them for the work that they're doing in agriculture? Like, why am I having those thoughts? So I started to question, right? And educators were always, well, you don't want to be like your parents. You don't want to be working the fields. It's a dirty job. So like we're brought up in a certain way, depending on in our communities, right? But those in institutions in power are given us certain messages based on our communities, and but it's not until like you really have that mentor, that guidance, like, oh, you know what, we are more than that. Our parents do have the answers to the seasons. They understand the earth, how seeds work, and it's the concepts of the stars and the cosmos and how we're connected to the earth, and like all this beautiful knowledge and wisdom that our ancestors passed down. Yet yet this dominant culture, pushes against our way of life, our way of seeing the world, and it's hurting a lot of our communities and our youth. So like, how can these institutions, organizations uplift and honor the folks that they're serving and who they are holistically? That's the beautiful work, and kind of giving up some of that power and putting some of those funds where they can contribute to communities who know like the answers and want to be part of those conversations. I just wanted to piggyback off that, Dr. Beltran. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, cousins. I appreciate it. As a teacher, I always be putting in things in the chat. So excuse me as you start to see it. People say an academic term, I'll try to hit it up. Because I know sometimes these are some terms maybe we're not always using in our everyday vocabulary. So when I think about culture and resistance, I think about this man bun here, recognize, okay, this took a long time. My two sons, Elijah and Matua, they're 16 and 13. And it's funny because both of their hair is kind of like this. And I realized the other day, I was like, oh, you know, they're kind of like subconsciously understanding that Tautau Anigua, I familia and Chobe, Tautau Itanu Gifinu Tamoru, you know, that we come from the very old people. And that even though we speak English, we do exist like here as indigenous people from a place called Guam, Saipan, Tinian, and Luta. And imagine it takes less than an hour to travel around the entire island. And imagine that the most sophisticated military in human history tested nuclear weapons, fought 2 world wars, a Vietnam War, a Korean War, a war in Afghanistan, a war in Iraq, and then they attack. And I carry all of that on my back. And that's how Chamorro people live in the attack. And that's a fact. The way they do the black and the brown, when they go down, when they hear the sound, when they run around on the corner. This morning, they broke into my car because the people they live in with a real deep scar, call it racism and sexism and homophobia, Islamophobia. The way they take my wisdom, they put us into prison, and then they try to take me out because I changed the system. And if you use the tools of hip hop, and if you use the tools of our ancient language, I mean, you are resisting. But to be honest, in my experience, my white cousins, that is not welcome in these schools. And so I resist, but it comes with consequences. It usually means for faculty of color that we're forever temporary. They call us adjunct, they call us assistant professor. But you know, I graduated from Berkeley and UW, you know, the places where, you know, all the wizards studied. And I have colleagues who have really honestly very mediocre educations. And I mean mediocre because their performance is mediocre. And the data of their students' graduation rates are mediocre and subpar. So there's been times where this was longer and all the way long around, but then I assimilated because my mentors told me, you need to cut that hair because people don't take you seriously. And sometimes these are other people of color. And I had to go through my journey to learn how to resist anyway, you know, and to speak anyway. So every day when I text my sons, it's always in our language first, because that's how I'm trying to resist. So thank you for letting me share that.
That's so awesome. Thank you all three. I mean, that was amazing. And I think, you know, I'm really really honored by all of you sharing these, you know, these beautiful words and reflections and being honest and taking up space, right? I think often we just don't get to take up space. And I'm so happy that, you know, that we get to have this conversation and, you know, and think about how we engage in, you know, often what, you know, they call third spaces, or, you know, what we call at the North Sound ACH, the liminal space, or, you know, what people that speak now what called Nepantla, right? And so I wanted to ask you all, and anybody can, you know, can go first, but, you know, what are the roles of institutions in either supporting this work if they can, or if they're not able to, what is the role of an institution in getting out of the way? How can they get out of the way if they are in the way of, if they are in the way of creating spaces where people can live in third spaces outside of the colonial project as much as possible? And so I wanted to see if y'all could reflect on that with us today and see like what are ways to do that, understanding that, you know, that we live in a context, you know, that you all pointed out is a context that's been trying to erase us for, you know, for at least 5 centuries. right? So understanding what that context, what are we able to do? And anybody can jump in first if you got, you know, immediate thoughts.
That's a heck of a question, Marco. um, I'm happy to share some things, some thoughts. Well, definitely, I really encourage folks to do that good work. You know, um, um, learn about the history. You know, learn about what took place. Our brother Michael was sharing some deep knowledge and history there. You know, and how society has acted upon communities of color. You know, it's and listen to our your community that you're serving. And one thing that really always gets me is like all these institutions and organizations are getting wealthy and being funded to serve our communities, that, you know, to help us, you know. So they're always making money off of our needs, you know, our needs, right? And it's like, okay, well, you know, check, like, look internally, you know, like who's on your board, you know, what's the voices missing, who's on your board, what's your policies and procedures, like how are they being equitable, and who's on those who's being part of those conversations. And if you're truly about racial justice and equity, it's like, you know, let's take some time, you know, let's take some time to learn and put some money where you really want to see that work thrive. It's I know it's kind of a well, I wouldn't say cheesy, but, you know, like when they say put your money where your mouth is, right? But like, communities are hurting right now, you know, and we see all this funding coming in, yet what's being provided uniquely to support unique communities of color? I don't see a lot in, you know, where I'm from. It's like we got all this money coming in, yet I don't see no youth programs. I see more youth going into prison, you know, but I don't see we see educational programs and activities, yet how many brown and black folks and Native Americans are part of those programs? It's shocking data. You know, check out your data, desegregate that data and look at where those opportunities are. You know, so I just wanted to provide that that information, that it's hard work, but it's some good work for us to get to where we want to be at. You know, we all got to be part of that conversation.
I guess I'll go next. I would say if you are a signature authority, hiring authority, budget authority, use the power of your pen. And to the white cousins in the room, you're in spaces the four of us will never, ever, ever be allowed in. You know, I don't know how else to tell you that. But you'll be in conversations that the four of us will never be invited to. And you'll be able to make decisions the four of us will never be able to make. So in case you didn't know that, sit with that for like 10 seconds. How do you use your power? For example, are you on a search committee or a hiring committee? Have you ever been? Then yeah, grade yourself. You know, how many people have you ever had the power to vote for? And how many of them were anti-racist people of color? And I don't mean the assimilated ones that we were talking about earlier. And all love to my assimilated cousins, because I know you had to do what you had to do, you know. And straight up, I used to really judge our assimilated people of color too harshly without really understanding the gravity of why they're that way, you know, and how every day they're subjected to really horrific racist treatment, you know, and it's at a cost of their salary and their benefits. So I would challenge you to use your power in a good way, you know. And if you can, also, if you're on boards, you know, how do you fund programs? Do you fund the programs in impoverished, like POC? Do you fund LGBTQ programs? Do you fund things that serve veterans and people with disabilities? I mean, there's definitely a scope to what we mean by equity, but I think you definitely have to center it with race, or you may risk it becoming something else. And so that I will pass to you, Dr. Beltran.
Relatives, you can call me Ramona, but thank you. I know it's political and all of the things, and I so appreciate that. But please call me Ramona. So thank you so much for your words, and they, from both of you really resonated for me. I'm thinking about my babies, and I'm thinking about the children and the future generations. And I'm thinking about what it means to make space for them to be who they are, who they were meant to be. And I am so incredibly grateful that I have arrived here at a point in the legacy of my ancestral lineage to where I can stop some of the painful legacies that we inherited and reclaim some of our beautiful ancestral ways. My son, his name is Teta Viate. It means rolling stone in our language, Itomioam Noki, Yaqui language. My middle child, her name is Semalulukut. We call her Lulu. It means hummingbird, Semalulukut Sewa. And my daughter is my baby, our very unexpected miracle over the pandemic. Her name is Sitlalit Lawililitzin, and her name means the star that lights the path for others. So being able to name my children in our indigenous languages has been such a healing. And for them to have a relationship to the essence of what that means is so incredibly beautiful. Like my daughter, when she sees hummingbird, she's like, Mama, that's me. And we know the stories of hummingbird, what role the hummingbirds played, in saving our cultures, our communities. I'm thinking about how I take them to, whenever we're outside and we come up to a body of water, we always go and greet the water. We always say, thank you for giving us life. My children know that the water is our first medicine, and my daughter will tell me that. She'll remind me if I'm not drinking enough water, she'll be like, Mama, you need to drink water, porque es nuestra primera medicina. Yes, baby, it's our first medicine. You're so right. You're so right. How beautiful is that? One time I was getting all frustrated putting them to sleep. And, as little kids can be resistant to their sleep, and they want to read more, they want to play, they want to do stuff. And I'm so frazzled. And my daughter was playing with her little, pretend flip phone, and she was pushing the button, and she stops me and she's like, Mama, it's Nana Kani calling from Spirit World. She's having so much fun. And I was just like, okay, slow down, stop, pay attention, be present. And I'm so grateful that they have that connection to where they come from, that they have that connection to the spirit world and to the natural environment. And I'm using these as examples because I feel like there is something really important about having institutions that support who we are in our wholeness, even if a lot of that is us healing and reclaiming. I'm learning Yaqui language. I mess it up all the time. My son, though, he's 7.5. He's so proud. He said, Mom, I speak 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Yaqui. Even though he only knows, maybe a handful of words, maybe a way to say, I love you, Grandmother Moon. But how powerful is that? I say this because there was also times when my kiddos came home and, we practice our spiritual path through our cultural traditions. So we don't go to church, we don't identify as Christians, but they come home knowing about these things. They come home knowing about Christianity. One time my son came home singing in, the 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He knew that song. We never talked about that before because we hadn't taught him yet that was the history they would teach him, but that's not the real history. I'm saying this because our institutions need to take a critical reflection of what they are upholding in the culture and the process of education. And whatever is happening in our education is also happening in our mental health care systems, in our health care systems. Those ideas that they're learning from school about Christianity, about patriarchy, those are things that are embedded in all of our institutions. So if I might take just a few more minutes, I don't want to take up too much time, but there's 3 things I want to share with you that I think are very, very important when it comes to your institutional power, leveraging it towards supporting the healing of our community. The first one is relationship. Taking time to get to know the communities who are most impacted, with whom we are working, and not just like, oh, I know them, they know me. No, it is a being with them, having connection, having vulnerability, shared space of vulnerability, taking time, much more time than most of our deliverables are allowing for us, but it's so important. I went and did a project down in New Zealand about 10 years ago. It was a digital storytelling as Indigenous media project. And we looked at historical trauma as part of the psychoeducation piece of the digital storytelling workshop. I was there for 6 weeks. I didn't do any of my research until the last 2 weeks, because the first amount of time that I was there, I was just connecting with community. I was going to people's homes. I was sharing food. I was sharing my danza traditions, my language. I flew all over the island and did all kinds of random things I never would have expected. It was so incredibly humbling and beautiful. By the time I did the research project, I did not have to recruit anybody. They came. That is very opposite of what happens in mainstream research. So relationship is key. The second one, representation. I believe this has been spoken about already, but I am going to just really support that idea. We know it matters to see people like us, to meet people who have a shared experience. And that is an entry point for helping us stay safe. One example really quickly. I'm sorry, I'm very conscious of the time I'm taking up, but these are the last 2 things I will share. This project that I did about 5 years ago called the Indigenous Youth Rise Up, worked with 5 different community organizations. And the community asked us to develop, implement, and evaluate a culture-centered HIV prevention curriculum for Indigenous youth and very Indigenous youth broadly. We're in an urban setting, so there's all kinds of diverse representation of tribes, nations, pueblos, communities. So we did our best. But one thing you should know is for youth ages 14 to about 22, it was 4 full days, 2 weekends in the summer. There was a 110 question pre and post survey, as well as a in-depth interview. 25 youth started with us. 23 completed the whole thing. That retention rate is unheard of in mainstream research. And why? They told us why. They said, because there were other people like me. Because I could talk about going to powwows, because I could talk about our cultural traditions, and I didn't have to start 101. And how it made them feel so accepted to see other people like them. The last thing I will share is culture and ceremony. These are two things, and I'm not talking about like appropriating ceremonies and bringing them into our practices. I'm talking about supporting the communities that are using their own cultural traditions and ceremonies to heal themselves in sustainable ways. We leverage in our institutions, we leverage the resources to support them. And that's another thing too, right, is leveraging resources. Part of also why we think that Indigenous Youth Rise Up project was successful is we paid our kiddos. We paid them. Probably not as much as they deserve for the amount of time that they put in, but we did that. And that's important too. To fight against our institutions who say, oh, $50 as an incentive is sufficient. No, $50 is not enough. No. Compensation for energy impact is necessary. So thank you for letting me take up all that time sharing those stories and those 3 points, but those are the takeaways I would share with you. Thank you.
Marco,
you're muted.
if you were speaking, you were still muted. Sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. I was gonna say, thank you all for your words, and I'll pass it over to Liz now.
You can't imagine how much I want to like still spend like 40 more minutes continuing this conversation. And Delphina, I want to make sure that we get to your question. So if you don't mind, I'm going to hold it until after the breakouts, but we'll like bring you in and maybe have you like raise that up as soon as we come back, and we'll have, you know, probably about 20 minutes after we do the breakouts. One of the things, just for the panelists to know, you know, we tried to, in this very short time, have all of our partners have time to talk about some of the things that they're hearing from you. So we are going to do, and it sounds like we might end up with like about 20 breakout sessions, but Natalie is going to put folks into groups of 4 to 6. And we're hoping that somebody will agree to just take some really high level notes while you're there. It's going to be about 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back and have you all be able to interact with the panel and both talk about what you shared, what you feel like you've learned, and Marco will then facilitate kind of another piece of this process. So Natalie, if you could go ahead and move folks, you know, just as a reminder, we go till 11:15. So we're going to go till about 5 minutes to 11, and then we'll come back and Marco will bring us back and help us get to closing. So thank you all so much. So, you know, thank you all for coming back. And, you know, and in some ways, Delphina, your question was also raised in our group. So would you mind just like unmuting and asking your question? And then Marco, I'll kind of hand it to you to facilitate where we go from there.
Awesome. Sounds good, Liz.
Delphina, are you still with us?
I am. Yeah, I can unmute.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I just, quick background is, you know, I work out on San Juan Island, so it's a pretty remote island community. I work at the Joyce L. Sobel Family Research Center, so small nonprofit that tackles many different things. Our big focal points are like on, you know, making sure basic needs and basic rights are met, and then also trying to figure out how we uplift our communities and promote resilience, particularly with our youth. And so kind of the thing I keep coming up against, and as far as like what I was trying to explain to my group as like my missing piece of knowledge, huge gap for me is I think different groups, right? They need a group that's specifically focused on like their cultural identity. And so like I was using the example, though not race oriented, it's I work with a group of young adults that are disabled. And so like that group is huge for them. It's like we come into this group, they come into this group, and it's like, okay, I can have my identity at the forefront and I don't have to play catch up with anybody, and it's a safe space. Something that's been put out to me recently is that, you know, okay, it's good to be having this group that's about cultural empowerment and cultural identity, and at least for the community of people that are disabled, it's also important to have integrative community. And so like, how do we figure out how we have this group that uplifts and empowers, and then make sure that we're also creating integrated spaces. And so in the youth group, the thing that I mentioned is just that, so I have a number of Latinx kids, and then I have kids from other backgrounds coming in, and we're trying to like balance this thing where like a good example would be like my colleague who's Mexican and leads the groups, like she'll go back and forth between Spanish and English. So it's good because a lot of the kids that don't speak Spanish and don't come from Spanish speaking families, they're excited, they're learning Spanish. This is awesome. And it gives the kids that are Latinx that come from homes where primarily are Spanish speaking, like, wow, I can have pride in my identity, but I want to figure out and get advice about like how to keep creating spaces that are integrated, where it's like many different backgrounds coming together, where ideally each group feels empowered and then they're able to come together and create like that kind of foundational space.
So is there anyone from the panel who'd like to jump in? And then I can be unspotlighted so that Marco can be spotlighted. But I am just anybody, and Michael, Enrique, I know that both of you kind of commented on that in the chat, but would you like to step in?
I'll tackle it briefly, but I would just say to be cautious because Latinos cannot escape white supremacy ever. So imagine in their schools, they cannot go somewhere where there isn't white supremacy. And then in society, really, unless they return to the motherland, they can't escape it. So I would just tread cautiously about trying to impact their affinity space ever. And it's tricky because you have 30% of other people who are not Latinx. I see this dynamic in many schools where maybe like Black students will congregate together, Pacific Islanders, and then I'm thinking of like, I have a dream, like we shall overcome. Let's all unite arms and march together and let's integrate. But the truth is, white supremacy is so violent that it's very dangerous to tamper with how people choose their self-determination. And that includes when they speak Spanish, when they choose to be together, when they want to be the majority, when they want to listen, when they don't want to listen. So I personally have been navigating like what I see as like bad behavior or not listening in class, trying to really understand it's not personal, it's not personal against me. And so even if I start to feel culturally uncomfortable because I can't understand what they're saying, I really have to like take a step back. So that would be my modest advice, is to just be cautious, to try to be, create spaces where everyone can come together, but to be mindful that they need that very sacred time.
Michael, thank you for sharing. I want to add, there's a one thing that I do want to encourage you is to also go learn from other programs that are doing some good work. There's so much good work happening throughout Washington, throughout the coast, and really focused on social justice, racial justice. It is important to have like a sort of strategic plan on how to bring these topics to your youth, right? And Latinos, like it's sometimes because of colonization, we forget, what has happened, and we try to forget sometimes, but and sometimes parents don't want to share that information so that they don't, so their youth don't bring that with them, so it's important to learn what's happening, and be guided through the youth voice as well. What are they interested about? What are they struggling with? And just be driven by youth voice and families. Bring in the families. Have families share about their foods, the process connected to science, to math. Whatever you can. It's all connected. But definitely encourage you to have students share, what's beautiful about each culture, because that's important. If we're truly wanting to prepare youth for this generation, it's getting to know each other, and learning from each other, and accepting who we are as different communities, because we have to live in this world as a people, and And if we're teaching youth to isolate and fear each other's cultures, then we're setting them up for failure, you know? Doing that work is also taking the time to learn how to do that work, Delfina, and I encourage you to put some money in there for you and your staff to learn how to bring those practices into your organization.
Thank you, Michael and Enrique. You know, I'm looking at the clock and we have 7 minutes. So I was wondering to see if there's other folks from other groups that wanted to ask any of the panelists any questions that they can answer here the 7 minutes we got left. If anyone wants to ask a question, please feel free to do so.
Hi, yes, I don't know if you prefer it to be live or in the chat, but my name is Mateo Hernandez. I'm here with my colleagues. We're from the Communities of Color Coalition. I think one thing that came up for us in our group, and I'm curious to pose to the larger group as well, is like, how do conversations like this that have happened today, right? Like, how do they center whiteness, right? And just by like, who is this conversation like trying to teach? Like, what is the intention, right? Just to remain reflective of like how, right, even in teaching, right, or having this conversation and building capacity, like who are we trying to teach, is something that I'm curious to get folks' perspective on.
Thank you for your question. Any of the panelists want to answer?
I would just say it's so hard because in all the spaces I move in, whether it's middle schools, high schools, colleges, or prisons, white people are running everything everywhere. You know, they're the decision makers. And I would say the data I see, for example, the data of faculty of color, it looks like the Jim Crow South of the 50s. Can you imagine that half of the community colleges in the state have never tenured a Black person in 50 years? And most of them only have between 1 and 4 total Black full-time faculty out of 200 full-time people. So what do you suppose their data of Native people is? Or their data on Latinos? So for me, for my people of color in the room, I mean, the good news is we'll become the statistical majority no matter what white people do. So the joke's on them. But the bad news is that means racism is becoming more nuanced and sophisticated. And so these attacks on Roe versus Wade, these attacks on voting rights, they're targeting us for sure. And so we have to just become, Mateo, I would say to remove yourself from hostile white spaces as much as possible. And remember, it's not our job to change white people's minds about jack shit, to be honest. So if you work with racist people, let them be racist and just be cautious that you really can't report them for being racist if you want to remain there. If you do, you have to create an exit plan because it doesn't matter where you work and what sector. White supremacy is pervasive and it's malicious. But stand in solidarity with POCs and create safe spaces where you're healthy and happy.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the flip side of the question, right, or the better way is like, how do we like recenter Black and brown joy in spaces like this, right? And Michael, I think, right, like by watching you laugh, by watching you have music in the background, right, like showing up in ways that we don't often get to, or the ways that we do in spaces are constantly policed, right? So it's beautiful to watch you like show up in this and like kind of create a counter space and counter narrative for like what's going on. So yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I would actually love to hear from you all because I saw another comment, and I don't know if this was from your group or from another group, but the comment from Meg Stevenson said, hearing about panelists' personal stories, their children's connections to language and spiritual world, that a person of color's perspective felt this doesn't center them, it centers those still learning. What action can we take beyond conversation? I'd love to hear from y'all. I don't know if I understood the chat correctly, but yeah, I'd love to hear. There's so much expertise in this group.
I am Brianna from Homage Senior Services, and I know Colors of Coalition Jay, I forget your name, but she mentioned in our breakout group, like how we take this a little bit further, not keep, a lot of times these conversations are surface level. And so our DEI manager, I think she's on this call as well, had just recommended, just randomly, had recommended like a book. And I started reading My Grandmother's Hands. And just like I am just in the beginning, but I feel like that book, if you haven't read it, definitely add it to your Amazon cart, because I feel like that book is for everyone. I feel like right at the beginning, it talks about like how each side to this larger system, if you will, is able to tackle the bigger beast of like racial justice and like what we can do, but also as a person of color, focuses on how we can heal from that, which is really nice. So if anyone has not read that, definitely a good read.
Bree, I love that book. It's been shocking my worldview. Was like, yes, this is it right here. And thank you for bringing it up, because it's, and I want to give props for those organizations and community members taking the time to do that work, because it's not easy work, and it's tough sometimes, like reflecting on what's gone down. Like it's like, wow, so just want to uplift those that are already doing this work and finding ways to continue this work moving forward. One conversation I had earlier was that, an elder always tells us to think about 7 generations, what you're doing, how that's impacted 7 generations from now. What are your kids going to say about you? Think about that, so, so like books like these, conversations like these, and are so critical and important and needed now more than ever. And whoever's got the passion and the drive and responsibility to move this work forward, let's go. Let's keep it doing it.
If I can add to that, and Cousin Bree, I just want to send you love. And if we can remember our elders in Buffalo who were murdered, and to the young people in Uvalde. And I mean, there's so many incidences in just the last few weeks, but if we could just pause for a few seconds for just a moment of silence, because that, of course, around racial justice is really why we all have no choice but to talk about these issues. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. Thank you, cousins. Marco, I pass it to you, Primo.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Enrique. Thank you, Ramona. We're so honored and grateful that you all were able to join us today for this conversation. I'm going to pass it out to Xenia, my colleague, to close us out. Thank you to all the participants that joined us today, took time out of your day to come and share space with us. And I'm very, very honored and very happy that this conversation took place. So Xenia, please take it over.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Marco. Just one more huge thanks, Ramona, Enrique, and Michael, for your time, for your wisdom, for sharing with us, and for being in this space with us. For everyone, and it's part of the network in here today, we do have a resource library. There were some incredible gems dropped in the chat that we will make sure to add to that resource library. If folks have other things that they think should be added to the resource library, you can send them over to us. This is really a place where we're holding some of the important pieces of knowledge that we've been shared, gifted, and that we are hoping that our network members will really dig into. And I think speaking to the piece about like what's next, right? What's next? How do folks take action? Next slide, please. And finally, we ask that folks please fill out the survey. We'd love to know what your thoughts were about the session. So take a couple of minutes to do that. The link is here in the slides. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, considerations, email us here at team@northsoundach.org. We are grateful for you all and being in this space, humbled by the time, energy, power, and wisdom of everybody who has joined us today, and certainly in the fight for a just and inclusive culture with everybody. So thank you all so much for being here today. And we'll close out.
Thank you, everybody. Much love to you. Peace.